Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Essential Facts About Raw Food webinar and open house series. This is our first webinar in the series, and it's called Misconceptions About Fruit and What This Means for Your Health. We are really excited to share with you today some little known yet very important misconceptions about fruit that could potentially make or break your success with a raw food diet, and that can mean the difference between reaching your health goals or falling short of them. We want all of you to be as successful as possible, and we know that breaking down some of the hurdles of misinformation can help you accomplish that. For those of you who don't know us yet, I'm Dr. Rick Dina, and you'll be hearing from Dr. Karen Dina in just a few minutes. We're both chiropractic physicians with a strong interest in plant-based and raw food nutrition, as well as the functional medicine approach to health. We're board certified and licensed in the state of California. We are the developers of the Science of Raw Food Nutrition series of classes that we taught in person for 10 years. We're also the developers and instructors of the Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive course, which we'll share more with you later on in this webinar. Between these courses and speaking at many conferences and many events over the years, we have become known for our thoroughness and scientific accuracy, our ability to make complex subjects easy to understand, and our encouraging approach that takes unnecessary hurdles out of people's way. So today we're going to cover just a tiny sliver of some of the information that we have to offer. I also wanted to mention we are the hosts of the Raw for Life Summit 2016, the International Raw Food Summit 2017, and the Raw Food Mastery Summit 2018, as well as the authors of the Raw Food Nutrition Handbook, which mostly Dr. Karen gets credit for. That's why her name is on the top there, and I'm just the width. I just basically wrote a few chapters and helped out with some of the proofreading and structuring. Now, before we move on, I do need to make it very clear that the informations and opinions expressed by Dr. Karen and myself in this webinar are not intended to be used as personal medical advice and should not be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition or as a substitute for individual health care. This webinar is presented with the understanding that we are not liable for misconception, misuse, or adverse effects resulting from its use. Any type of dietary change, nutritional therapy, or fasting should always be undertaken with the supervision of a qualified healthcare practitioner. Now, we may be those healthcare practitioners for you, but you're not going to get individual consulting by watching this webinar. Okay, so moving on, in this webinar today, we are going to break through some misunderstandings about fruit and raw foods that can get in the way of people being successful in their quest for better health. Now, when Dr. Karen and I got started on our raw food paths over 28 and 31 years ago, respectively, there were far fewer resources available than there are today. So it's sort of ironic that never before today has there been such a time when there's so much information about raw food available, but unfortunately with such a small percentage of that actually being accurate and reliable. So due to the internet, access to information about raw food nutrition is easier than ever, but is the internet really the best place to always get accurate and useful information that will sustain your maximum health for a lifetime? I know that when I often go to Facebook groups and watch YouTube videos and do those types of things on the internet, I do see some good information out there, but so much of what I see is so inaccurate. And it hurts sometimes. It's like sometimes I just don't even do that for a while because it's rough to see. And I often think to myself, no wonder so many people start on a raw food diet, but then they don't keep it up over the long term because they're not getting useful information that will help them make the best decisions to help them get the best results that they're looking for in their health. We have heard over and over again from our students and our patients about how confused they are. We are truly committed to helping as many of you as possible take the healthiest, most effective approach you can, supporting you in your pursuit of optimal health. I'll leave you with a quote from a former student of ours who took our previous Science of Raw Food Nutrition curriculum, which is the precursor to our updated and expanded Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online and interactive curriculum. Denise from Canada says, there isn't a better course available designed to arm anyone desiring to improve the health of themselves and others, allowing them to weed through news reports, marketing, and research. On top of that, a balanced, open approach presented in an inspiring yet modest manner. And please feel free to let us know if we deliver what Denise is claiming here by the end of the webinar. So now we'd like to share with you a little bit about what inspired each of us to start on this path in the first place. First, you'll hear from Dr. Karen, and then you will hear from me.
I found raw food at a time when I was experiencing notable fatigue, for which there was apparently no answer. I was in college at the time and was sleeping 10, 12, and sometimes even more hours per night, and still waking up non-refreshed. I saw 3 medical professionals, and after multiple lab tests and evaluations, I had a diagnosis: fatigue of unknown origin. They had a whole list of everything I didn't have, but could not pinpoint the source of my fatigue. I asked every single one of them if my fatigue had anything to do with my college diet and lifestyle. They all emphatically said no. Things started to change, however, when a friend gave me a copy of a book that discussed vegan diets and the connection between diet and health. I also learned about the connections between diet and the environment and the way animals are treated. With all of these compelling arguments, I was open to giving this approach a try, and I became vegan. In addition to feeling good about eating compassionately and leaving a lighter footprint on the earth, I was so excited to find that my fatigue actually started to improve, despite what the so-called experts, in this case the medical professionals, said would happen. This personal experience opened the door to my thinking that diet really could make a difference in health and left me open to exploring other opportunities. Then when I learned about and implemented a raw food diet, my energy soared far beyond the impressive improvements I experienced by eating vegan. Now, in our 3-part video series, I shared the story of my introduction to raw food. Long story short, my fatigue vanished, along with a variety of other symptoms I'd had for years. And I had more energy than I knew what to do with. I could not remember a time when I felt better. I started to look healthier, I slept better, I enjoyed exercising, and my digestion improved. I was so inspired by the health results I was experiencing that I felt compelled to learn more about the inner workings of the human body, nutrition, and the diet-health connection. I really wanted to immerse myself in learning as much as I could, so I earned a second undergraduate degree in biology and received doctorate-level education in naturopathic medicine and chiropractic, which helped me to put everything I observed into perspective and on a much deeper level. Over the years, I've refined and revised my approach to raw food and tailored it to my individual needs, and we can show you how to do this too.
Now that you've heard from Dr. Karen, I'd like to share a little bit of my story with you. So here I was in 1986, not feeling my best. I was having a lot of allergy trouble in those days, which actually was a major part of most of my childhood. I have it in a way to thank because I felt so lousy, I was motivated to try to learn about some things to help be healthier. A few months after this, I started making major changes in my diet. And then fast forwarding to the spring of 1987, I went totally vegan with lots of raw foods included. So here I was in the summer of 1987. I'm the guy on the right here, and my brother was on the left, and you can tell his muscles are a bit more defined than mine. He had been at it for longer, but I was really starting to feel good. And I had been reading at the time that some people were saying, well, if you want to build muscle, you have to eat muscle. And if you only eat plant foods, you're going to wither away. Yet I was going to the gym regularly. My brother and I were about to go off on our landscaping job. That's why we were dressed that way. We had shirts on before the picture, though. And I was building muscle. My muscles were getting bigger. I was adding more weights to the machines, and it seemed to be working. So a few months into veganism at that point, and just a couple of months into working out pretty seriously. So moving forward to Thanksgiving of 1987, I ran in a 5-mile race in my town, well-known race, and I was giving it all I've got there, as the caption says. My mom just happened to get a picture of me near the finish line, really going for it. So that was a great race. I'll never forget. There I am with my brother at the end of the race, the muscular guy you saw next to me a few slides ago. And he was really into running also. And normally he would have been running in that race as well, except he had just finished a 7-day fast, and it wasn't appropriate for him to run yet. And so for us at the time, fasting was like the new frontier. You know, we started out with eating less fat and more fiber, and then moving to vegan and then raw. And then now we were all excited about fasting. And in fact, a few months after this photo was taken, I fasted on water only for 14 days, which among other benefits made a night and day improvement in my allergy issues. And I was absolutely delighted about that. So how did I do in the race? Well, let's take a look here. If you take a look at the bottom left, that might be a little bit hard to see. So let's bring a close up here. I ran this 5-mile race in 29 minutes and 7 seconds. So some of you who are runners might know out there, if you know, 8-minute mile pace for a 5-minute mile is number 600, you could probably guess better than I could how many people were in the race. But I'm going to guess 1,200 at least, maybe 1,500 or so people in the race. And I came in 37th. And I ran track in high school, but I wasn't especially good. But it seemed like all of a sudden I was, really up there with athletic performance. And looking back, I had been a vegan, mostly raw, for 6 months at that point. And I'm going to say that that was likely a major contributing factor. So here are the results of that race, which I mentioned. A couple other races that I'm proud of. In 1993, it was early in chiropractic school for me. I ran the Atlanta Half Marathon in a little under 1 hour and 27 minutes. So that's a 6 minutes and 38-second pace on average for 13 miles. In 1994, I ran my second 5K race. I had run one earlier where I did pretty well, but then I wanted to do better the next time. So I did some track workouts, and I ran that race in just over 17 minutes, which is a 5.5 minute mile pace for just over 3 miles. And I remember in that race, I came in 5th place, and there were like 600 or 800 runners in that race. So, I thinking back to the people who were telling me that I wasn't going to get enough protein on this type of diet, it started to seem really silly by that point. So fast forwarding to 1999, my girlfriend at the time went to an amusement park, and this was some big giant pterodactyl on top of this truck at the top. And you can see there that I've got some pretty good muscle development. I was mostly running at the time, but I was going to the gym a couple of times a week, and I had been doing so for a year or so at that point, and was building muscle as a result. And then a few months later, I believe this was the summer of 1999, so 12 years into being a raw vegan, And unfortunately, I was sedentary more of that time than I was active. But every time I started to get active, give it a few months, and I seem to be doing really well. So once again, people had been telling me for 12 or so years now that I wasn't going to be getting enough protein. And it seemed really silly, not just from my own experiences, but from meeting other people as well, and also studying the science behind it. So even though I was extremely convinced, and I'm just using protein as an example here, that I was getting enough of that, I knew that so much of the information people were spreading out there was inaccurate. And this is the type of thing, for example, that can keep people from going on a plant-based diet because they're concerned they're not getting enough protein, and then they go down a different path that may not serve them as well. And I know people who've actually had heart attacks and other things because of that particular misunderstanding. Now, unfortunately, there are lots of other misconceptions that have persisted over time, sometimes in the same form, other times in new forms. So, for example, the confusion about carbohydrates has been around as long as I can remember learning about nutrition, starting back in 1986. But the information about the alleged dangers of fructose, which implicates fruit as well, is within my realm of studying nutrition, a newer development, but that's been around for about a decade now as well. So in order to help, like we said, overcome the hurdles of misinformation, to help give you good, accurate, solid things to connect with so you can make the best health decisions, next, Dr. Karen is going to share some valuable information with you about some of the misconceptions about fruit. And I'll follow up after that with a clinician's perspective, where we'll take a look at the lab results of several long-term raw vegans who I've worked with over the years, including myself.
Fruit is a popular topic of conversation in the raw food community and the nutrition world in general. There are so many different points of view on fruit, some favorable and some not. So today we're going to clarify some of the misconceptions about fruit so that you'll have reliable science-based information to make more informed food choices. Now, if we're going to talk about fruit, it's important to consider fructose, which is a simple sugar found in fruit. To get started here, what is fructose? Fructose is a monosaccharide. Mono means one, and saccharide means sugar. And fructose is one of the simplest sugars of all, along with glucose. And it's one of the primary sugars found in fruit and other whole natural plant foods. So it's not just found in fruit, it's found in other plant foods as well. The fructose found in whole natural plant foods is accompanied by vitamins, minerals, fiber, antioxidants, phytonutrients, and water. So essentially, fructose in whole foods is in a complex with a variety of other nutrients. Now, fructose found in processed foods, by contrast, does not necessarily have these same benefits or these same nutrients in a whole food complex, because in processed foods, those elements have likely been processed out to some degree. It depends on the food. Now, I've heard people use fructose and high fructose corn syrup interchangeably, but they are very different in composition and how the body treats them. Fructose is not high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is 100% fructose. High fructose corn syrup is composed of both fructose and glucose. And like fructose, glucose is a simple carbohydrate. So high fructose corn syrup contains both of them, fructose and glucose. The predominant form of high fructose corn syrup is composed of 55% fructose and 45% glucose. So in high fructose corn syrup, there's a little more fructose than glucose. Here is a pictorial representation of the two showing the breakdown. In fructose, we have 100% fructose. And by contrast, in high fructose corn syrup, we have 55% fructose and 45% glucose. So let's take a look at how the two compare. Here is a table that shows fructose, high fructose corn syrup, and glucose, and the glycemic index of each. So for fructose, we have a glycemic index of 15 plus or minus 4. Now, what the plus or minus sign there means is that there is a range for the glycemic index for fructose, and that range is 11 to 19, with an average of 15. So that's why we see 15 plus or minus 4. The glycemic index of high fructose corn syrup, by contrast, is 62. For glucose, the glycemic index is 103 plus or minus 3. So similar to fructose, glucose has a range for its glycemic index. And in the case of glucose, that glycemic index range is 100 up to 106. Now, there's a lot of talk about the glycemic index, but what actually is it? The glycemic index is a measure of the effect of carbohydrate on blood sugar levels. It's a measure of how fast blood sugar levels rise after the consumption of a particular type of food. The higher the glycemic index, the quicker the blood sugar rise. Here's a table showing the values for foods that are low, moderate, and high glycemic. So if a food is low on the glycemic index, it will have a value of 55 or less. Moderate glycemic foods will have a value of 56 to 69, and then high glycemic foods are 70 to 100 or above. So for comparison purposes here on this next slide, we have the glycemic index values for fructose, high fructose corn syrup, and glucose, and then we show them on a bar chart below just to show you how different they are in their glycemic index values. So according to the table that we just saw on the previous slide, fructose is considered to be low glycemic. High fructose corn syrup is moderate glycemic, and then glucose is high glycemic. Now, it's interesting to talk about the glycemic index values for things like fructose and high fructose corn syrup and glucose, but what about fruit? What about actual whole food? Where do various fruits fall on the glycemic index? Just to refresh our memory before we move forward, foods that are low glycemic are going to have a value of 55 or less. Foods that are moderate glycemic are going to be 56 to 69, and high glycemic foods will have a value of 70 to 100. Now, oftentimes people think that fruit is high glycemic because it has a sweet flavor, and people are oftentimes surprised when they actually see the glycemic index values for fruit. So let's take a look. So on this table right here, we see a variety of different popular fruits. Cherries have a glycemic index value of 22. Grapefruit is 25. Pears are 38 plus or minus 2. Same thing with apples. And then plums are 39 plus or minus 15. And strawberries are 40 plus or minus 7. So very interesting to see this here because all of these fruits can be considered low glycemic. That can oftentimes come as a surprise for people because when you think about apples or pears or cherries and strawberries, we think of sweet fruits, sweet tasting fruits. But as you can see here, the glycemic index values for them would put them in the low range. Next, we have some more fruits. We have peaches, grapes, and bananas, mangoes, and kiwi fruit. Peaches, 42 plus or minus 14. So there's a bit of a range there. Grapes, 46 plus or minus 3. Grapes are considered low glycemic. When I first saw that number, I was surprised too, because grapes are so sweet. Same thing with bananas, 51 plus or minus 3. Bananas are low glycemic. Mangoes, 51 plus or minus 5. Mangoes are considered to be low glycemic, although at the upper end of the range, we're dipping slightly into the moderate range. Kiwi fruit, 53 plus or minus 6. And then apricots, 57. We're moving into the low moderate range. Pineapples would also be in the moderate range, figs and raisins as well. Now, there are some fruits that are high glycemic. Watermelon would be one of them, along with dates. Now, the dates that we have here on this chart are actually medjool dates, and I like to mention here that some varieties of dates are actually considered low glycemic, so we have to take dates on a case-by-case basis. Now, what about some other foods? Let's take a look at some foods that are thought to be high glycemic but actually aren't. Good example would be raw carrots. People oftentimes think that they're high glycemic because they have a bit of a sweet taste to them. And yes, they do contain fructose. However, if we look at the glycemic index, we see that it's 16. So carrots, raw carrots, are considered low glycemic. Lentils are low glycemic also at 32 plus or minus 5. Yams are sweet, but look at their glycemic index, 37 plus or minus 8. They're considered low glycemic. And even boiled carrots, they come in as low glycemic at 39 plus or minus 4. Once again, here's our table. Low glycemic foods are 55 or less. Moderate glycemic foods are 56 to 69, and high glycemic foods are 70 to 100. Now, what about other types of foods, like, for example, processed foods? Where are they on the glycemic index, and how do they compare to fruit? As you see here on this table, the glycemic index values for a number of these foods are quite a bit higher than what we have seen in most of the fruits. And it's interesting to take a look at this because oftentimes people assume that fruits are going to be high on the glycemic index, but then when we compare them to some of these more popular or processed foods, we see that the values can be quite different. Of course, we have to take the food on a case-by-case basis, but it's very interesting to make this comparison. Now, it's also important to mention that many high fructose corn syrup containing foods are also high in fat and are often consumed in excess of the person's needs, leading to weight gain. Which brings us to our next topic. Now, for several years now, there's been this perception or rumor that all fructose turns into fat in our body. Now, is this actually true? Let's take a look at this concept from a biochemical standpoint. Does all fructose turn into fat? What we see here is a biochemical map of the fate of fructose in the human body. Now, I know that this chart looks a little complicated, so I've distilled it down into a more simple visual representation for you. There, that's a little bit easier to follow. As you can see here, fructose has essentially 3 fates in the human body, and which fate is chosen for fructose or the pathway that it takes really depends on the metabolic situation in the body at the time. This chart shows that fructose can be converted into glycogen. So here's fructose. Fructose can be converted into glycogen, or it can be used for energy or go into energy production. Or it can be converted into fat in the form of triglycerides, which Dr. Rick is going to talk about shortly. Now, what is glycogen? Perhaps you've heard of it before, but if not, it's the storage form of carbohydrate in our body. Now, our body stores a limited amount of carbohydrate in the form of glycogen in our muscles and liver, and uses that glycogen for energy when we need it, such as when we haven't eaten for a certain number of hours. And I'll give an example next for clarification. Now, to reiterate, the fate of fructose depends on the current metabolic situation or needs in our body. Now, I can use myself as an example. I enjoy running, and let's say that I wake up on one particular morning and I decide that I want to go for a 5-mile run first thing. before eating. I haven't eaten anything since the night before, and that meal was digested long ago. In other words, I do not have a recently consumed source of calories. So while I'm on my run, where are my calories coming from? Since the preferred fuel for my muscle cells is carbohydrate, my body largely uses glycogen to fuel my run. So when I get back from my run and have one of my fruit-based green smoothies, where does that fructose go? What is it used for? A good amount of that fructose is going to replace glycogen, the glycogen that I used on my run, and some of it also will go into immediate energy production. But a large percentage of it is very likely going to go into glycogen to replace the glycogen that I used on my run. Now, let's say that a couple days later, I decide when I wake up in the morning that I'd like to go for a run. But I'm extra hungry, so I eat my fruit-based green smoothie first and then wait an hour or two before going on the run. While I'm on my run, what's happening to that fructose from the green smoothie? Is it going into glycogen production? Could it be going into fat production? No. My body needs that energy right now for my run. That fructose is going into energy production for sure, because I need that energy right now. For our last example, let's say that it's a special occasion on some other day, and it's evening and I've eaten all of my meals for the day. In other words, I've eaten all the calories that I need for the day at this point. Now, since it's a special occasion and we have guests who have brought over a raw pie, we all decide that we're going to have some. Since that pie has a fructose-based sweetener in it, what now likely happens to the fructose in that pie? Does it go into glycogen production or potentially energy production? No, most likely not. Since I've previously eaten all the calories I need for the day, my glycogen stores are filled, and I already have plenty of calories from my previous meals to create energy. In this situation, the fructose from the sweetener in that pie has likely been converted into triglycerides to eventually be stored as body fat. So as we can see here, fructose has many fates depending on the metabolic situation in the body, which can vary depending upon the time of eating, level of activity, and the amount of calories consumed. I also like to mention that in some situations, fructose can be converted into glucose as well. Fructose does not always turn into fat, and Dr. Rick will now continue the conversation.
Now, to give a little bit more information about triglycerides themselves, triglycerides are the primary way that fat is transported as well as stored in the body. So if we want to take a look at the slide here, we can see that there is a backbone of glycerol represented by this yellow oval here, and attached to that are three separate fatty acids represented by the red squiggly lines. Now, fatty acids is one of my absolute favorite topics, so we're not going to go into that here because we have enough on our plate to talk about all at once, but we can see that these fats have different configurations and are shaped differently, and then based on that, they function differently in the body. So when our liver, as well as other organs, but it's primarily the liver, manufacture fatty acids, including those that they manufacture from fructose, they package the fat up in triglyceride form, just like you see here on the slide. So if all fructose turned into fat, then the level of triglycerides measured in the bloodstream would be significantly elevated in high fruit eaters who are consuming a significant percentage of their total calories from fructose. Now, fortunately, in order to verify if this is correct or not, we can measure the level of triglycerides in the bloodstream through a lipid panel, sometimes called a lipid profile, which is a very common and inexpensive blood test, something I consider just part of measuring the basics in patients that I work with in my consulting practice. So let's take a look at how much fructose is consumed on a standard American diet to start with, and we'll compare that to how much fructose we might get on a high fruit raw vegan diet. We come out with 28 grams. Okay, so how about on a high fruit raw vegan diet? There's a number of assumptions we can make, but I think you'll find that the ones I'm going to use here are fair and reasonable. So let's say the average high fruit raw vegan consumes about 2,000 calories per day. It could actually be quite a bit higher in somebody who is really physically active, but let's go with 2,000 calories. And let's say that 80% of those calories come from fruit. Now, we want to make sure that there's plenty of vegetables in the diet, a few key nuts and seeds that fill in some of the mineral profile that fruit isn't quite so high in. So again, we'll go with 80% here, and that means about 1,600 calories come from fruit. Fruit contains, on average, somewhere around just about 90% of its calories from carbohydrates. So 1,600 by 90%, 1,440 calories from the carbohydrates in fruit on a 2,000 calorie high fruit diet. Fruit has about 50% of its calories from carbohydrates from fructose. So we take the 1440, multiply it by 50%, we get 720 calories from fructose, but then we divide that by 4 because there's 4 calories per gram, and we come out with 180 grams of fructose per day on a typical high fruit raw vegan diet. So 180 grams per day versus 28 grams per day in 2016 for the average American. That's 6.5 times higher. So let's look at this in bar chart form so we can visualize the contrast. Now, this fructose from high fructose corn syrup here is thought to lead to things like high triglycerides, high LDL or bad cholesterol. It's thought to be a major contributor to insulin resistance, leading to high blood sugar levels. And then there's a whole host of problems that come along with that. So if fructose itself is the culprit, at 28 grams per day on average in the US, and raw foodists are eating 180 grams per day, then we would expect their lab results to be absolutely horrible looking, right? Well, again, luckily we can test, and I have been doing so for many years, both individually as well as in my consulting practice. So let's take a look. These first few results you're going to see are me individually. Now, we can see here triglycerides, right? Glycerol and 3 fatty acids. We see here the reference range is 35 to 200 milligrams per deciliter. I've seen some labs actually go up to 250. That seems way too high for me. Later on, you'll see 0 to 149, and that's a more typical reference range. I personally feel the best and am the happiest with myself and with patients when the triglycerides are in the double digits. So I'm a little more stringent than the typical bell curve reference range out there. So here we have one time when I got tested, my triglycerides were 45, nice and low, well below what I'm happy with, well below the reference range, or well within the reference range. Next time, 54. Here we have the next time, 87. Now, interestingly enough, you may notice my total cholesterol at 179 was a bit higher than my previous scores of 120 and 124. My little note here in the PDF that I saved of this said that I was stressed in my relationship at the time and I had eaten some vegan junk food. Not such a great idea, but full disclosure here. So my triglycerides actually went up a bit. They went up to 87. Next time, though, I was over that phase and back to normal. 32 for triglycerides. And my little yellow note there says that that was my lowest ever, my PR, my personal best, or personal record, if you will. Next time, interestingly, we see triglycerides at 54, which is great. You can see, though, my total cholesterol went up a bit. And that was interesting because at the time I was eating about 2 cases, about 18 young Thai coconuts per week. Loved those things. Put them in a couple bananas in with a couple of them, and some frozen mango, some vanilla bean or something. I was really into those shakes, but my cholesterol went up, and that kind of alarmed me because I'm used to it being nice and low. So then I stopped the coconuts, and next time it was down to 138, as you can see, and my triglycerides were at 35, also nice and low. Next time they were at 56. Now we're spanning many years here. Next time at 35. So really, I'm really happy with all of these numbers. This is the final one of me, triglycerides of 59. The next 2 are of a high fruit eating female, not the highest fruit eating, but probably at least well over half of her calories were coming from fruit at the time. In this measurement, she was 38 years old. Triglycerides were 64. In this next measurement, triglycerides were 68. She was 41 years old at that time. Here is the profile of another woman in her mid-30s at the time. Ate very heavily raw food, maybe once, occasionally twice a week, might have some cooked food in a meal. Probably 20 or so % of her calories came from fat. She ate a good amount of vegetables. All the rest of her diet, the majority of her calories came from fruit. 57 one time, and then 55 in the follow-up. On the bottom here, we have a male in his early 30s. Majority of his calories came from fruit, and his triglycerides were 87. That's really good. On this next slide, we see 5 different sets of results here, and these were all on the same person over the course of a year. We were doing some experimenting with some other things in his lab work, trying to see if we could get some values to change, and while we were at measuring the follow-ups, we did a lipid panel because, like I said, it's a normal part of blood chemistry, and it's relatively inexpensive and always a good thing to see anyway. So this is a male in his early to mid-50s, physically active, and an official low-fat, raw vegan 80-10-10er. So what do we see over the course of the year here with him? 86 for triglycerides, and then we see 101, little higher than I'd like to see. Next time, though, is back down to 70, then 98, and then 78. And if you add those up and average them out, it averages out to 87. So that's pretty darn good. And this guy was probably consuming at least 180 grams of fructose per day from fruit. And by the way, vegetables have some fructose in there too, so I didn't even count that. So all in all, putting this together, he was probably consuming over 200 grams of fructose per day, yet had triglyceride levels in the reference range. And once again, if all that fructose was turning into fat, triglyceride levels would be sky high consistently, but that's not what we see. A few more just to make sure we really get the idea. Up top here, triglycerides 57, and this was from a different male in his early 50s at the time. He had been 100% raw for 4 years, then put some cooked food back in his diet for 2 years or so, and then had been all raw again for a month or two at the time of these labs. And when you change your diet, things like cholesterol and triglycerides change within a few days or a week or so. So in other words, there's some other things that take longer, but not triglycerides. So he was at 57. Majority of his calories came from fruit as well. Here next, we see a woman in her late 40s, very lean, very muscular, just super chiseled, delightful lady. who eats giant quantities of vegetables, probably about the quantity of vegetables Dr. Karen and I eat collectively, she would eat in a day. Few nuts and seeds in her diet. The rest of her calories were coming from fruit. Her triglycerides, 43. That's awesome. Last two here were of young women, official 80-10-10ers, low-fat raw vegans. First young lady here, 22 years old at the time of the test. Her triglycerides were 90. Next woman, 26 years old at the time of the test, and her triglycerides were 101. So this is, you've just seen 23 results, 9 or 10 people, all on a high fruit, raw, mostly raw, totally vegan diet. What you just saw is indicative of people I have worked with over the years. These that you did not see just exceptions that I cherry picked. These are typical findings, and I've got a lot more where those came from. Now, occasionally I do see somebody on a high fruit diet who does have slightly elevated triglycerides. Sometimes some of the other lab values are a little off as well, such as LDL levels, total cholesterol levels, sometimes even glucose levels. And when that's the case, there are solutions, but there are many things to consider in clinical practice and in the real world with people. So I take each of those on a case-by-case basis. But those are clearly the exceptions, not the rule. So as a rule, I see triglycerides in a healthy range on high fruit, raw vegan diets, as you all just saw. Now, a few other thoughts here, that in the low carbohydrate camps, healthy fats are touted as desirable, right? Carbs are bad and fat is good. So one thought that came up for me in putting this presentation together, if fat is good and desirable and fructose gets turned into, all fructose gets turned into fat in the liver as they claim, wouldn't that be good? Isn't fat better than carbohydrates? And if the liver does that for us, that would be a good thing. But in any case, some of the downsides that they might point out is that when fructose increases triglycerides, which again, we don't typically see, that can be associated with elevated levels of LDL and VLDL, which are the so-called bad cholesterol. And number one, not all LDL is bad. Sometimes in trying to figure things out with patients, I would want to see the subfractions of LDL, to see the LDL particle size. And to make a long story short there, when we see small, dense fragments of LDL, those tend to be more atherogenic than the large buoyant ones, because the small fractions tend to get stuck in the arteries more easily than the big ones. So sometimes we have to take that into account. But typically in high fruit raw vegans, LDL levels are so low that they're totally safe, and we don't even have to go down that route. So another complaint there that we can see in the low carb camp that doesn't actually pan out in the real world with people who eat fruits and vegetables. Now, they also say that fructose turning into fat in the liver can lead to something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now, if you have that, your liver does not function properly, and there are a number of health and metabolic ramifications in the body that are not at all positive. Now, if that is the case, luckily, lab testing can come in handy again, because on a basic or a comprehensive metabolic panel, you would see elevated levels of liver enzymes. It's extremely rare that I ever see elevated liver enzymes in fruit and vegetable based, including very high fruit, raw vegans. So that doesn't pan out either. So I got a little behind in putting my bullet points out. LDL and VLDL tend to be very low and in healthy ranges. In fact, if you want to go back and watch the replay of this, you can watch all the results again. Sometimes the LDL results got covered by the circle when I was circling triglycerides because we wanted to see those, but nevertheless, you can go back and take a look. Liver enzymes tend to be healthfully low where they should be, and that's really good. And one of my favorite things to measure in high fruit raw vegans is their blood sugar measurements, things like fasting glucose, A1C, which I wrote a recent blog about, as well as fasting insulin. And as often as the triglyceride numbers look excellent in high fruit raw vegans, so do the blood sugar measurements. And when there are exceptions, we can work with that. So the take-home message for here is that we do not want to let misinformation, and there's a lot of it floating around out there, dissuade you from eating healthy foods like fruit, or dissuade you from taking up any other healthy foods into your diet, or avoiding any other things that are good for you because somebody is misinformed and information spreads that way. Now, at the same time, if you don't love fruit and you don't want to be a high fruit raw vegan, I just picked high fruit raw vegans for this to point out that it's very questionable to say that all fructose turns to fat, because I think we've dismissed that. So that's why I chose them as an example. So even if you don't want to eat a lot of fruit, you can eat plenty of other healthy foods and not have to worry about your liver turning all of the other carbohydrates into fat either. Now, another point is fruit is great, but it's not quite perfect. Vegetables are incredibly important in any diet, including a raw vegan diet, and a few selected nuts and seeds can help round out a healthy nutritional as well as metabolic profile. So to summarize here, a lot of research has been done on processed food omnivores as well as rodents. And what they find is that when rodents are overeating, excess calories from fructose has a greater tendency to turn into fat than excess calories from other sources, such as glucose. But does that translate into humans, and does that translate into raw vegans? And it's not looking solid at all that is the case. So what we have is we have two completely different scenarios, and people say, well, high fructose consumption is associated with high triglycerides, therefore fruit is bad for you. And again, it doesn't pan out that way. So although fructose consumption is a common element in both processed food eaters and in high fruit raw vegans, although we saw a big difference in the fructose intake, the nutritional and the metabolic situation is completely different. So in a typical modern American diet, we have an overconsumption of calories, including excess calories from fructose. But what does that high fructose corn syrup usually come with? It comes along with foods that are extremely calorie dense, and they're calorie dense because they're low in water and they're low in fiber, and they are nutritionally deficient. Low in vitamins, low in minerals, low in phytonutrients, low in antioxidants. They have an excess of unhealthy fats and an unbalanced ratio of essential fatty acids, and the list could go on and on. On fruit and vegetable-based diets, people tend to be optimizing their calorie intake. As many of you have discovered, it's not that easy to overconsume calories from fruits and vegetables. And these foods are high in water and high in fiber. That makes them take up a lot of room, so they fill you up without too many calories. And they are loaded with vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and antioxidants. And they tend to have a very healthy mix of the essential fats that we need without the excess of fats that are the major cause of elevated triglycerides and other problems in the body. In today's webinar, we presented some great information on the glycemic index of fruit and other foods and examined the question of whether all fructose turns to fat from a biochemical pathway, as Dr. Karen talked to us about, as well as a real-life clinical data perspective that I shared with you to help us understand what really happens to the fructose in fruit when it comes into our bodies in the context of a healthy diet. And this is one of those things that's so important because misinformation about subjects like these can cause people to take a path and make dietary choices that are not always in the best interest of their health. And we want all of you out there to experience the highest level of health that you are willing to accomplish. And there really shouldn't be any limits to that. Now, we talked about just a tiny sliver of information, this idea mostly of fructose and fat, and a little bit about the glycemic index today, and there is so much more where this came from. So if knowing information like this to help you succeed with raw food and plant-based diets, to experience a higher level of health is important to you, then we have a solution. If raw food science explained to you in easy to understand terms in a fun format with plenty of time to sink in, a manageable time commitment, and plenty of opportunity to ask questions and get clarification directly from us is important to you, then we invite you to join us for our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition and Educator course. It's a 12-month class that begins on August 29th of 2018 coming up. The time commitment is about 2 to 3 hours per week. And what that 2 to 3 hours a week consists of is, number one, professional quality videos similar to what you saw here in this webinar. And number one, you can watch these videos whenever you want. They're available 24/7 in our membership site. We also break the 2 hours into generally 20 to 30 minute video segments. So you don't have to watch 2 hours all at once. You can watch 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, whatever the case may be. We've designed it to be as convenient as possible to work into people's modern lives. Now, another thing to consider is that 2 hours of these videos is often hundreds of hours worth of investigating and reading and learning and checking things out and figuring out what's most important out there and what's not so important. And then we hone that down into 2 hours to deliver it to you in a way that makes sense and that you can understand. I know sometimes people get confused when they say, oh, well, this course is 500 or 800 hours and yours is only 100. Well, the thing is, you can go read this stuff. That's what they tell you to do. Here, go read this stuff. I'm like, wow, that would be easy if we were administering a course like that. Go read this stuff and then take a test. Well, the thing is, we've done that reading for you. We've done that research. We've done that investigation. And there are certain things like our clinical experience, like I showed you with those triglycerides, that you can't read anywhere else. Because how many raw food clinicians are there out there sharing their actual real life clinical experience in a way that makes sense to people? So it's 2 hours worth of a lot of information really honed down so you can get so much out of just a very reasonable time commitment. So before we offered this course, the precursor to this course was our Science of Raw Food Nutrition classes that we taught in person for 10 years. When we did that, we had a 12-hour 2-day course that started out the curriculum. And here's a couple of quotes from some students who took that 12-hour 2-day course. One of them said, I've gotten more from these 2 days than I got in a year at and they didn't say the name, but the well-known nutrition program. I'm looking forward to the next segment. Another student said the sheer quantity and quality of information packed into 2 days by extremely knowledgeable and professional presenters was outstanding. So in our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online course, we have a couple of quotes here. Anne-Marie from Paris said, I love my weekly videos, and you can see some of the video thumbnails popping up here of the different topics that we cover, just a little sampling of them. And Cynthia from Southern California said, the course content is awesome. And as you'll see later, Cynthia had an extensive background in raw food nutrition before taking this course, and actually Anne-Marie had a pretty solid background as well. So in addition to these finely honed, very informative videos, we also have notebooks that go along with the videos designed to complement them. We actually send you 4 notebooks over the course of the year, and it's over 900 pages worth of notes. And also included in there are the thousands of scientific references that we utilized to put our curriculum together. So if there's anything you want to go look up directly for yourself, you've got the information in order to do that. So the reason I say that these notebooks are designed to complement the videos is because in a lot of courses that we've seen before, online courses, what they do is they take sort of the easy way out for notes, and they just get some software that listens to the video and then makes a transcript of things in paragraph form. Now, if we did that, that sure would have been a lot easier for us. But what we did instead is we really thought things through. And we thought, okay, how would we want it to be in the notebook here if we had the notebook open when we were following along with the videos? And how would we want it if we just opened it up and wanted to look at things? So we've got bullet points, we've got the charts and graphs that you see up on the videos in the notebooks. And that way, when you're watching the videos, you don't have to go crazy trying to write down everything we said, because the majority of that is in your notebooks. That allows you to pay attention to what you're seeing on the screen and be able to watch everything and be able to listen to everything, knowing that it's in the notebooks also, and it really allows it to sink in. So they are a great complement to the learning process. Now, some students still like to, take extra notes and fill things in, and that's fine. And because this is a video that you're watching, you can hit pause, you can go back, you can listen again. So it's very, very thorough. And another nice part of these notebooks is that they are lifetime reference material. So at any time in the future, you've got your notebooks there to go quickly take a look at to refresh your memory about something that you are interested in. And our students just absolutely love the notebooks. That's what they've told us directly, as well as when we have sent out surveys. So in addition to that, 6 to 8 times per month, we have conference calls. So those are on Tuesdays, and there's 2 different times to accommodate different schedules as well as different time zones, because we have students from all over the world. So they allow you to ask us questions and interact with us directly. So one of the ways you can do that is you can either call in on the phone, as it shows here, or access it through your computer. And you can either raise your hand and ask us questions directly, and we're in real time there. Or another option is that every Monday before we have the Tuesday calls, we send all of our students out an email. And that email has the call-in information as well as the URL computer links to access the calls. If you click on those links prior to the call, you can type in your questions in advance. Then we will see those questions when we're on the call, answer them to the best of our ability, and then we save and record all of the calls. So if you're able to not make a call, maybe occasionally, or maybe even one call doesn't fit into your schedule at all, you can still get direct interaction with us as part of the course by submitting your questions in advance and then listening to the calls afterwards. Instead of just giving you some reading material and telling you to take the test, or maybe just showing up once a month or something like that, we are there many times per month, almost weekly. We take the last Tuesday of each month off, but other than that, we're there every Tuesday to make sure that you can interact with us and get any clarification and make sure that this all really makes sense to you. And we love answering questions. It's just, we look forward to Tuesdays now very much to interact with our students. In addition to that, we have a Facebook group for our students, and it's optional. Not all of our students do it, but most of them take advantage of that. So first of all, it's a great way for our students to get to know each other. They're also very helpful to support the conference calls. So oftentimes a student will ask a really good question during the conference call, and we'll share some information, again, answer things to the best of our ability. And then oftentimes we'll think, you know what, we've got a chart or an article or something else, either that we've got on our computer or that we've seen online, and we don't have the time to submit that right then because we're on the call. But once the call is over, we'll oftentimes add some extra things into the Facebook group that you can go look, and we'll tag your name on there. So it's very helpful in support of the calls, as well as just to have a general sense of community. So a few other things to mention about the structuring of the class. So exposure versus cohesion. On the one hand, there are two of us. And Dr. Karen and I, for roughly the first 15 years on our raw food and plant-based paths, that was largely independent of each other. And for the last roughly 15 years or so, that has been together. And so on the one hand, we have a broad perspective. There's two of us, and we look at things a little bit differently. But on the other hand, we are a married couple, and we love this stuff. This is what we talk about when we go out on walks and when we're driving and those types of things. And we are able to use both of us to integrate everything together so it all falls into place and it all makes a lot of sense. The previous incarnation of Mastering Raw Food Nutrition was known as the Science of Raw Food Nutrition that we taught in person for 10 years. Piles and piles of rave reviews from that, and oftentimes there was not enough time to answer questions and to have discussion. The way we've got it set up now online is for every 2 hours or so worth of content, there's an hour typically, and sometimes those calls go quite a bit longer. We just stay till we answer all the questions. There's roughly an hour worth of time in small groups for students to ask us questions. So there's more than enough time, and a lot more than we had to interact with us directly. May sound ironic, but much more time to interact with us directly than our students got when we taught this class in person. The other thing we've noticed is that the questions that our online students ask us are a lot more in depth, and they show that our students understand the material much better than our in-person students did. And again, that's because you're not bombarded with 7 hours a day worth of information day after day after day after day. You get 2 hours a week, you watch it again, you get to think about it, you get to talk to us about it, and everything sinks in at a much deeper level. So we've been actually absolutely delighted about how things have been going. And we're a little over halfway. We're getting near the last quarter of our second year of having this class online. And of course, going into our third year, starting late August. And it's basically been working out really, really well. We're very happy with it from an educator's perspective. Now, speaking of education, many of our students go on to incorporate the information learned in our course into their raw food coaching practice, into their other types of educational endeavors. Some people decide to take that up once they've learned all the good information from our class, but many of our students just want the information for themselves to help lead the healthiest lives possible. And even when that's the case, oftentimes, whether you want to be or not, you become an educator. Because people see how you eat once you start eating differently, and they start asking you, oh my God, can you get enough protein? And what about calcium and iron and B12 and essential fatty acids? And doesn't fructose all turn into fat? And, on and on and on. And so we teach you in the course, especially once we get near the end of the course, we teach you how to integrate all the information together and to share that with other people in a way that creates rapport instead of conflict. Because when you're confident in what you're doing that's different than everybody else, you're much less likely to be stressed about it. And that, of course, is a really important part of health. The other benefit is that you'll be so much less likely to be led off track. No one will be able to knock you down with misinformation. So what if somebody saw me eating a bunch of bananas or mangoes or melons or apples and oranges, whatever the case may be, and they said, oh my gosh, didn't you know that your triglycerides are going to go way up and your blood sugar levels are going to be way off? And maybe they give me some technical stuff and they talk about their experience and they're some kind of nutritionist or they have some type of certificate. Now, somebody might be intimidated by that and maybe they will start to use less fruit in their diet. Would that deter me? I mean, you guys know, Dr. Karen and I, we know the science and we know our own personal data and we know the data from many, many people that we've worked with. So in fact, not only would I not be deterred if I were in the mood to, depending on the situation, put on my diplomacy hat, I could very much turn that around to a learning experience for that person and a confidence builder for me. In fact, we got an email a little over a year ago from one of our first year Mastering Raw Food Nutrition students. Just out of the blue, this email shows up and the subject line was sharing a great experience. And here's what she said. She said, Doctors Rick and Karen, I had the most amazing experience yesterday evening and today. I'm in Monaco on business and I had meetings with 4 business people. It started out yesterday evening as I started my diatribe about nutrition. I started in reaction to a comment over dinner from one woman who referred to the fact that her husband ate lots of eggs and meat because he is a bodybuilder. A couple irrelevant things in there. And then she said, then I went on about how the body only needs the daily requirement of protein and the balance will be converted to energy via glucose or stored as fat, and how the fat is also used for energy. Then I turned to the balance between omega-3s and 6s and the inflammatory effects of omega-6s. Then I moved on to cholesterol and why we do not need it and how our liver produces it in the production of bile, being clear on how it is needed to emulsify fat, even the fats we get from eating vegetables, with a special comment about the omega-3s in leafy greens. The next morning at another meeting, they wanted more. And after explaining in some detail how the wrong mix of fat makes the structure of cells stiff and rigid, resulting in resistance for hormones, insulin, and serotonin, and the further consequences of each of those, and how too many omega-6s cause inflammation in our bodies, resulting in various disease processes. She says, I went on to calorie optimization overall and why overeating is bad, having too many free radicals and not enough antioxidants is bad, and why a meat and egg diet is deficient in vitamins, phytonutrients, and fiber. We talked about satiety and I shared how excess weight can cause dysfunctions in the hormones controlling satiety. I was on a roll and everyone in the meeting listened with pure fascination. I must admit I was also listening to myself with pure fascination. They were all just like I was before I started the course. They didn't know even the fundamentals of nutrition. How is it possible that so many well-educated people know so little about nutrition? Knowledge is power, and I felt totally empowered today. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have never been as interested in any learning experience in my entire life, and I am simply bursting with enthusiasm and passion. You have changed my life forever. So there's one example where a student realized how much she had learned from the course in a real-life experience, and instead of being the weirdo eating her salad off to the side, she took a leadership role in that interaction and had a good influence on other people also. So those are the types of things that can come about when you are really well educated about any subject, in this case about nutrition. We mentioned Anne-Marie from Paris before, who said she loved her weekly videos. Her official testimonial for the class says, I find it very helpful to have the point of view of doctors who are really impartial in their opinions and who explain things with scientific studies and fact, not philosophic thoughts, and who do not sell anything. I feel very lucky to be able to ask any questions each week and always receive a good response. I've learned a lot. I understand much more now, even though I studied biology and have read a lot of books about raw food nutrition. She said since then, but the real translation was prior to the class starting. She says, I hope there will be a second year for us to enter even deeper into the science of raw food. Thanks to you, Karen and Rick Dina. So when we hear that an enthusiastic student wants even more of what we have to offer, that makes us feel good that we're on the right track. Cynthia, who you heard from earlier from Southern California, said, I've been practicing a raw food lifestyle since 1998 when I did an internship at the Tree of Life with Dr. Gabriel Cousins. I really appreciate Dr. Rick and Karen's scientific approach to the subject of raw food nutrition and have appreciated learning the scientific basis of why this way of living is so beneficial. And one of the reasons that science is so important to Cynthia is because she is a real world scientist. She's a wildlife biologist that goes out in the field, and for weeks and sometimes months at a time, she camps in a tent and makes scientific observations. And so she knows the value of that, and she really appreciated that from our course. Now, if you don't have a background in biology and science like Anne-Marie and Cynthia, don't worry, we make it understandable for you. Here are a couple quotes from our previous Science of Raw Food Nutrition students. One said, thank you for your extreme efforts to reach the non-nerds. You were very organized, and I never worried that I would not have my questions answered. This was very professional and respectful of all levels of previous knowledge. Another student said the real strength of this course is the willingness of both presenters to engage students and respond to questions. Keep it up. And like I said, we love our Tuesdays where we get to interact and engage with our students and talk about raw food nutrition, our favorite topic. A couple of other quotes from our actual Mastering Raw Food Nutrition online students. So Monica from Southern California said, I have taken many classes, and she means in plant-based and raw food nutrition. She said, this was the most responsibly taught with high quality current content. It is one of the best classes I have ever taken. And Natalia in the beautiful Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico said, this course gives you the knowledge and tools to be educated about plant-based and raw food nutrition. It's based on scientific researchers, awesome teachers. Thanks, Dr. Karen and Rick, for this exceptional course. It is so worth it. And this is just a small sampling of the testimonials we've received over the years from our curriculum. So in other words, there's lots and lots more where those came from, but we're going to keep things moving here in order to wrap up. So bottom line here to summarize is that you get 2 hours of professionally made videos per week. You get 900 pages and 4 notebooks thoughtfully designed to complement the videos and be lifetime reference material so information can sink in more easily. We have those 6 to 8 times per month conference calls where you can interact with us either directly or with a little bit of time delay, but it's still direct one-on-one interaction with us. If you ask a question, we answer it, then you'll listen to the call afterwards. We also have a Facebook group added as extra support. All of this is designed to give you the experience where you can learn the information and get the inspiration and the confidence to follow through on it for a lifetime of supercharged health.
Remember earlier when I told you my story about my decision to try raw food when I was in an energy pit of fatigue? Well, now it's time for you to make a decision. You're watching this webinar because you're interested in plant-based and raw food nutrition and in taking your knowledge to the next level so you can supercharge your health and maintain it for a lifetime. At this point, you already know if you want to learn more from us. This class will only be offered once this year, and once it fills, it won't be offered again until summer of 2019, and likely at a higher price. Right now, we're offering this course at a special early bird price for a limited time. As you've heard, our students are so happy with the new online format, and we've noticed a difference too. You can watch the course videos on your own schedule and rewatch them as many times as you would like. This way, you'll have plenty of time for the information to sink in. In addition, you'll receive the support of a comprehensive set of notes and near-weekly question and answer sessions in real time in small groups directly with us. We love connecting with our students, and we'll be there with you the whole way. You can access this course anywhere you have an internet connection, which is most places on this planet. On this webinar page, you'll find a link where you can click and sign up for a time to speak with us to answer any questions you may have about our curriculum, the structure of the class, and to help determine if it's a good fit for you. We invite you to sign up for a time to speak with us about your health goals and how mastering raw food nutrition can help you reach them. We look forward to speaking with you soon. And now we're going to take a 5-minute intermission. We'll be back soon to answer questions, and in the meantime, please feel free to sign up for a time to speak with us.